You're listening to Extended Techniques, a podcast about contemporary music.
In January this year, Prototype Festival of Experimental Music and Theatre in New York featured Chernobyl-Dorf, an archaeological opera in 7 novellas by composer duo Roman Grygoriv and Ilia Razumeiko. Most of the 8 shows at La Mama Theatre were sold out. The opera also received Music Theatre Now Award in 2022 and just recently was awarded the first prize in the opera and music theatre category by the Royal Philharmonic Society.
The performances in New York were so amazing that we couldn't resist from learning more about the opera makers and their previous work and countless places, ideas and inspirations that went into the show.
The opera presents the descendants of humanity, who find themselves in a post-apocalyptic world. Wandering around the ruins of nuclear power plants, abandoned churches and theaters, they tried to recreate the lost civilization through archaeological performance rituals. We are presented with a myriad of visual, theatrical, and musical masterpieces that lend themselves to multiple interpretations.
What I really enjoyed about my experience of Chernobyl-Dorf was the lack of clear connection between the scenes, which makes you give up the idea of constructing any stories. It reminded me of Richard Foreman's plays and his statement, "Mysteries should not be solved. Dance to the music of this commandment, or at least make it look like dancing."
I think the composer's fascination with cinema explains much.
Not just any cinema, but as David Lynch described.
There's a lot of films out in the world. There's a lot of films that are, kind of easy to understand, and that's really good. And as soon as you do something that's a hair more abstract, then you get into a thing. Some people, they really want to understand everything. And other people, they appreciate an abstraction, and they like a room to dream. I love films that, allow me room to dream. I really believe in this thing of intuition, that people feel, think their way, and they know, but it's not a knowing that really can be said in words all the time. It doesn't happen on an intellectual level, really. It happens in another way, and it's kind of a magical thing.
Indeed, when I talked to the composers at the La Mama Experimental Theatre Club in January, here is what Ilia Razumeiko told me.
We respect David Lynch from our hearts. Roma is fan of him. I have even a small instrumental piece suite in memoriam Laura Palmer.
We will discuss the opera in detail at the end of this episode. But first, how did the composers, opera makers arrive at their cinematic opera style? How did it all start?
are the youngest composers we are covering in Extended Techniques podcast, but it feels that now they are in their late 30s, it's worth catching up with their work. Together, they have produced 11 operas in less than 10 years that were staged in Rotterdam, Vienna, Huddersfield, Liverpool, Frankfurt, Prague, and Chernobyl-Dorf is their third New York premiere. They met at Kiev Music Academy in 2007, where they studied with the same teacher.
We had the same professor in Kyiv Academy of Music. It was Hana Blažíková, a beautiful female composer, and unfortunately she died at the end of February 2022. Also, we studied in Vienna. My professor was Karna Essel, electroacoustic composer. And Roma studied in postgraduate program with
Jorge Sanchez, the best professor
It's very
ever.
interesting
Просто.
composer from
Чувак.
Venezuela.
The first exciting project Roman and Illia did together was a music festival in Ivano-Frankivsk, which influenced their future opera collaboration.
Very strongly. Actually, since 2010, we working in the West Ukraine, in the Roma home city of Ivano-Frankivsk. It's a small but very special city. It's special for Ukrainian history, for Ukrainian literature, and it was very special experience because we making multidisciplinary festival in the public space. So we use the whole city as a stage, and we use different kind of arts and different kinds of media, and even this festival maybe was, we can say, our first opera project.
The first three operas Grygoriv and Razumeiko created together, unlike their later works, were based on specific stories, and the libretto in each of them was recited by a narrator. You have just heard an excerpt from their first opera, Yov, composed in 2015, and the one they first brought to New York in 2018. The libretto was based on the Book of Job from the Old Testament.
According to the story, Job is a wealthy and God-fearing man with a comfortable life. God decides to take away Job's wealth, family, and material comforts, following Satan's accusation that if Job were rendered penniless and without his family, he would turn away from God. Yet, after all imaginable and unimaginable afflictions, Job remains firm in his faith, and God eventually returns him his health and his wealth. In the staging, I like the minimalist setup, where the prepared piano performs a role of an orchestra as the center of the universe. The pianist and the singers who encircle the piano use percussion instruments such as snare drum and timpani sticks, triangle, cymbal, coins, and keys for playing on the strings and the body of the piano.
Eight of the opera's 14 movements are set to the Latin text of the Roman Catholic Requiem Mass, but the opera also moves seamlessly between diverse styles, from classical, jazz, and folk music to breathing, screaming, whispering, and overtoned singing. Yo was commissioned by the major Ukrainian festival of contemporary art, Gogolfest, themed Art of War, Art of Peace, Art of Love in 2015. The festival's title referred to the war in Donbass, which started in 2014 when Russian forces illegally occupied Ukrainian territories in the east of the country in response to the Maidan revolution. The festival director, Vlad Troitskyi, recalled, "It was a brutal year for Ukraine. In their lives, people sometimes face moments when they lack strength and are unsure about their purpose. It doesn't matter whether you are a believer or not. Where to find the strength and love of life? That's what this story is about." In an interview in 2019, Roman Grygoriev recalled, "The timing of the opera, that it came after the Revolution of Dignity, was especially important. We could not come to our senses for a long time. And then came Yov as a result of these emotions."
You know, this story is 4,000 years old, and it's important for Christian people and for Muslims, so it's very, very universal.
Indeed, Job is one of the 25 prophets in the Quran, where his story has the same basic outline as in the Torah.
But it was influenced, all art and all life in Ukraine was strongly influenced by the revolution and Russian invasion in Crimea and Donbass.
opera by Grygoriv and Razumeiko, Babylon, was based on the story of the Tower of Babel. It was produced by Vlad Troitskyi and the group Nova Opera in 2016.
The libretto was based on the biblical story. The human race, speaking one language, wants to build a city with a tower that reached all the way into the heavens. But God interrupts this project by confusing their speech so they no longer can understand each other.
This was an opera circus, and unfortunately feels sadly relevant today.
In Babylon, one can hear folk songs, Latin prayers, words and verbal constructions from 19 different languages.
The idea of multiple languages was also represented by different musical styles: avant-garde,
Rock,
shamanic folk, trip-hop,
allusions to Italian opera, and French chanson.
Here is Razumeiko's comment on the opera's polystylism.
It's related to the topic of multilinguistic, multi-stylish piece. But also, in Ukraine we experience some kind of a freedom, You mustn't do German avant-garde opera there, or American lyric opera. You can do what you want.
Sometime each of us has to build their own ark.
No generation can avoid a flood.
Junk information and fakes, that is the great flood of our days. Can we overcome it and survive?
What will we take from this chaos to bring to a new life?
The following opera, which concluded the biblical trilogy, was The Ark, Kovчег, based on the story of Noah's Ark from the Old Testament.
I like the stylistic change from Babylon to Ark with its minimalistic style, references to Steve Reich.
And Arvo Pärt.
Ark is an opera ballet, a beautiful dance. I recommend watching it.
are listening to Extended Techniques, a podcast about contemporary music. If you like this episode, please leave a rating or a comment on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also leave a comment at extendedtechniques.com.
After the biblical trilogy, Grygoriv and Razumeiko created 5 more operas in collaboration with Nova Opera. And we will fast forward to the last one, Gaz, which was performed in Kiev, Vienna, and in New York under the direction of Vlad Troitskyi of Yara Arts Group, resident company at La Mama Theatre. Opera Dystopia Gaz is based on a 1919 expressionist play by the German playwright Georg Kaiser. It's about the events set 100 years in the future, an explosion in a gas factory that produced the energy for the entire world.
The play was produced by a Ukrainian theater director Les Kubas in 1923 in Kiev, and this production inspired New York-based director Vlad Troitskyi, who offered Grygoriev and Razumeiko to create an opera in 2019.
On the stage, we see technologists generating new workers, a composer showing them how to listen to music and recreate it, and a conductor who models the new people, teaching them how to create mechanical music.
The story and the scenography convey the spirit of the avant-garde of the early 20th century, but the sound palette is certainly postmodern. in the finale, the performers destroy the piano.
Haz was positively received in Europe and in New York, but the critics interpreted the open-ended narrative in different ways. A conflict between revolutionary versus totalitarianism,
An exorcism to drive out the demon of socialist realism from Ukrainian culture. A warning, people shouldn't turn into zombies. Machines shouldn't rule people, and people shouldn't become machines.
To put it simply, all is not right in happy socialist workerland.
The future, the past, the present, the future, a dream, new generations, institutionalized underground, post-feminism, new non-avant-garde, reception, transformation, declaration of space, eras of post-truth, eras of mind, labyrinths of mind, the future, the past.
So, what was the main idea of this entire utopia?
Maybe they just wanted to crash the piano with a long prelude?
You know that Gas is also some kind of archaeological piece. The story is expressionist drama of the 20s by German dramaturg Georg Kaiser. This drama that was staged by Kurbas and then it was proposed by Verlana Tkach to work with. It's also like you look back into some historical avant-garde and trying to work with that. Even that we break the piano, it's also nothing new because the people breaking pianos here since 60s regularly. The story can be present, but what we are doing is creating some very special situation and space. You turn the theater in other space and other situation, and you experience this situation with the audience.
You are listening to the end of the overture to Opera Lingua, music theater in 7 books, which premiered in the fall 2021 at the Vernadsky National Library of Ukraine in Kyiv.
Now I will always miss the brass section when I listen to Handel's Concerto Grosso in D minor because of the beautiful video that accompanied this reference to Handel in Opera Lingua.
I imagine you were trying to read the notes on the tattoo.
I certainly wish I could read the notes.
Music is only one of the languages in opera lingua, the others being German, Egyptian, Yiddish, Ukrainian.
And we have invented language. We have Nazguля
Nazgul Shukaeva,
and Marichka,
Marichka Shtribulova.
who are trying to communicate in non-verbal way, but it's also a language, musically, but without words. We had English as a link to Fluxus.
The works in the Fluxus performance workbook are copyrighted by Fluxus and by the individual artist.
We have Italian as a link to classical opera, Fabia. Agnus Dei Latin. It's also linked to musical Western tradition.
In his short story, The Library of Babel,
Which was one of the inspirations for the opera,
Jorge Luis Borges wrote, "If an eternal traveler journeys in any direction, they will find, after untold centuries, that the same volumes are repeated in the same disorder, which repeated becomes order, the order."
we can think of this idea of the order as references to or quotations of texts and music from the past in postmodern works. The same masterpieces are repeated.
Yes, and opera lingua reminds me of reading Borges. One cultural reference leads to another, and you end up willing to read all those books, watching all those films.
The title of the first book of the opera, Homo Ludens, refers to a book by Dutch cultural historian Johan Huizinga, a study of the importance of play element of culture.
Visually, Homo Ludens is a game of cultural references, like David Lynch's sitcom Rabbits.
And Hermann Hesse's Glas Perlenspiel.
In Motherland Songbook, the second book of Lingual Library, the most interesting is the invention of new language. It reminds me of Kathy Barbarian's piece Stripsody.
Or Joan da Barbara's Erin. In Lingua and Chernobyl-Dorf, listeners can indulge in a broad range of extended vocal techniques: circular singing, ululation, glottal clicks, and throat singing.
In the Book of the Sky and the Netherworld, which refers to an ancient Egyptian funerary text, the language of music emerges from the search for spoken language.
And this new language sounds familiar, a response to Webern's Richard Current Fugue, in which Webern responds to Bach's The Art of the Fugue. Things from the past repeated to create a new order. The fourth book, Bel Canto Futuro, is a meditation on the beauty of operatic singing.
The costumes of the two protagonists, red dresses and blue wigs, remind of the Silencio club scene in David Lynch's film Mulholland Drive.
And the characters' actions present in part the story of the film, the challenges of choosing to sing while living.
We see what happens when two people want to get the same role.
In the fifth book, Good Girl Gone Bad, in the spirit of Lax's performances, Camilla Rhodes destroys the violin.
This song, Freeling, was written in Vilna Ghetto during the Holocaust. It's about a search for hope in the very dark times. It goes, "Springtime, dispel my sorrow."
Freeling opens the sixth book of the opera, Wind from Podil, which is dedicated to the memory of Babin Yar massacre carried out by Nazi Germany's forces. Podil is the area where many Jews used to live in the city.
It was very important to work with Yiddish and with the topic of Holocaust. We have Babin Yar, one of terrible Holocaust pages on Ukrainian soil, and one of the novels is dedicated to Yiddish, which also disappeared from Kiev Street and from Kiev culture, together with the Jewish population.
The final book, The Seven Angels, features all 7 performers singing Agnus Dei, Prayer for Peace.
In his Library of Babel, Borges wrote that the human species hovers at the verge of extinction, yet the library, enlightened, solitary, infinite, perfectly unmoving, armed with precious volumes, pointless, incorruptible, and secret, will endure.
Listening to Extended Techniques, a podcast about contemporary music. If you like this episode, please leave a rating or a comment wherever you get your podcast or at extendedtechniques.com.
Approaching the end of the episode, we want to return to Chernobyl-Dorf, archaeological opera in 7 novellas. It premiered in Kyiv in 2020, before Opera Lingua, but its performance history extends to present. 10 shows in Europe and 8 in New York over the past 2 years.
Both operas were created by Grygoriv and Razumeiko together with artists of Opera Aperta, a laboratory of experimental opera. The name was inspired by Umberto Eco's seminal text, The Open Work, which theorizes the idea that performers have substantial role in interpreting musical or theatrical works. No performance of Opera Aperta's opera is exactly the same.
Opera Aperta, we run a small studio in the city center of Kyiv. This is the room belongs to Composers Union of Ukraine. It's like a really small studio, 16 square meters. And we work in this space since 2015, first with the vocal ensemble of Nova Opera and with Gogol Fest. And later in 2020, we decided to give this place some name, and this name was Opera Aperta, which has linked to Umberto Eco and in general also to the avant-garde of the 60s and 70s music and as well in the theater, because in Umberto Eco books he has a lot of links to Luigi Nono, Berio, to Stockhausen.
These were the composers who created open works starting from the 1950s, which were later discussed by Eco. The Opera Aperta Laboratory in Kyiv includes a team of musicians, dancers, and actors, sometimes all these roles embodied in each person, and also a library of books on aesthetics of experimental arts, and a scholarship fund named after Antonin Artaud that supports multidisciplinary artists.
But let's talk a bit about the opera. Where does the name come from?
The name Chernobyl-Dorf is a combination of the names of 2 nuclear power plants. Zwentendorf near Vienna was built in 1978, but was never launched because of protests by environmentalists and a national referendum. Chernobyl plant was built around the same time and exploded in 8 years.
So, these power plants, Zwentendorf and Chernobyl, symbolize nuclear history in democratic Austria and totalitarian Soviet Union.
And their histories prompted Grygoriv and Razumeiko to imagine the future after all possible disasters that could inflict the earth, in which the inhabitants of Chernobyl-Dorf collect the fragments of our lost civilization. The composers started working on the opera by traveling to different sites in southeast of Ukraine, where members of Opera Aperta filmed 55 performances with landscapes, waterscapes, and abandoned structures on the background. Ilia Razumeiko explained this process in a discussion that followed one of Chernobyl-Dorf performances at La Mama Theater.
If we speak about this opera, Chernobyl Dorf, it was non-conventional process of creating. At the beginning, it was no score, no story or libretto, and we don't sit in studio. But we undertake a few, we call it video archaeological expeditions. So we travel to Chernobyl exclusion zones and to after, then to different places in Ukraine. And our goal was to explore this landscape and to find through this landscape stories and music and all the different stuff. And much more later, we come to studio to rehearse and to make music theatrical for stage.
We'll walk through some of these locations and the music that surrounds them in the opera to create that special situation in space. We invite you to explore the videos of the performances on our episode page and the footage of the places at chernobyldorf.xyz, and of course watch the entire opera.
The lament to the god of time, Kronos, comes from the opera's second novella, Drama per Musicam. The scene was shot at the Marganets Quarry.
The Victorian-style dresses of the singers are incredible, and positioned on the background of the terracones create a surreal apocalyptic feeling, mourning for the loss of our civilization.
This entire novella features beautiful costumes designed by Katerina Markosh. I love the dance of the furious Dosimetri's Ulysses as he is spinning around the stage looking for tonality.
How can one search for tonality?
I guess you can when it's been forgotten.
Conservati rimangono costanti, rimangono questa reazione nucleare,
Another shot at the terracones is presented at the beginning of the sixth novella, Orfeo e Eurydice, in which all performers shed their clothes, and Orpheus delivers a passionate monologue. "You are a myth," he tells Eurydice.
Isn't she actually a myth? They are both a myth.
He also says that she is a new opera of an old world.
They are in it.
Eurydice, been there every day, it continues here and now, here and now, here and now.
The first novella, Electra, in which Chernobyldorf women go to the river shore to see a goddess dancing and handing out little golden suns, was shot at the Kakhovka water reservoir with the Parisian nuclear power plant in the background.
The scene is immensely beautiful. Unfortunately, this landscape no longer exists, because the dam of the Kakhovka power station was destroyed in summer 2023.
What happened with the 24 February with large-scale invasion of Russia into Ukraine, literally all places of our archaeological expeditions became the theater of war. So first it was Chernobyl exclusion zone, which was temporarily occupied. The second most important expedition was to South Ukraine. If you remember this water landscape, this is South Ukraine in front of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station, which is now occupied. Then we filmed and create drama per musica in a small village in front of Energodar, Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station, in small palace of culture in small village, and now this village is totally destroyed, and this palace of culture is destroyed. The water landscape that you see also disappeared because last summer Russians blew up the Kakhovka dam, and it was also the largest ecological catastrophe in Europe after the Chernobyl. It happened somehow that just after large-scale invasion we started to do European tour of this piece, and then tragically it was all very direct about the war and about this invasion and this tragedy.
The video that inspired the fifth novella was shot at an abandoned church in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. The ritual of worshipping circuit boards in lieu of icons in traditional costumes of Polessia region continues on stage with an altar of multiple circuit boards and without the costumes.
It all culminates in a beautiful, at first all too familiar, and then rather unexpected Requiem Mass. Chernobyl can be experienced simply as an endless stream of sprawling beauty, but it also triggers thoughts about our planet's future. The music of Bach and folklore will survive any disaster, but what will that disaster be?
Дорогие ребята, мальчики и девушки, придет время.
Whatever the disaster will be, watching the final novella Saturnalia makes me think that it will come as a result of a dictatorship.
Grygoriv and Razumeiko with opera Aperta are working on their new opera.
I don't know, maybe it was not the time now in Ukraine and inspiration to create big new opera, but what happened in the summer with Kakhovka Dam on the river of Dnipro, this catastrophe and how this catastrophe is connected to our opera Chernobyl-Dorf forced us to do next project, and now we are working on it and trying to find how to speak about the next ecological tragedy, not Chernobyl, but Kakhovka. We are in the process, and this opera will be presented in the Rotterdam Opera Festival in May.
Gaia 24, Opera del Mondo, Rotterdam, May 16th, 2024. This was the 6th episode of Extended Techniques, a podcast about contemporary music. You can find a playlist, works cited, and links to complete video recordings of all operas mentioned in this program on the episode page at extendedtechniques.com.
Our theme music was composed by Erler. We're an independent production in Brooklyn, New York, located in Lenape, the ancestral territory of the Lenape people.